Hit the Diamond was one of those Steven Universe episodes that I look back on, mainly the fact that even if it may not be one of the most memorable episodes of the series, it is still one of the most entertaining episodes from an underrated standpoint. After the events of Barmaids, Rubies came out of the Wolverine Eye to hunt down a gem who Peridot thinks it's her since that she called Yellow Diamond a clod. Garnet unfused so that Ruby can be with the other Rubies to make sure that they don't go inside the barn to get Peridot, but it ended up backfiring, so the only alternative that they can do is playing baseball against the Rubies, and the Ruby who was fused with Sapphire has to be on the other team. To tell you the truth, this episode, for what it is being underrated when it came to a standpoint, I honestly felt like that this episode was mainly taking it down after the events of what we experienced from the third season premiere. When I watched this episode for the first time, it really feels like an episode that isn't really a Beach City episode, but at the same time, it's not really connected to the main plot of the episode. Even though that the Rubies, well, one of them will have their own episodes in the future, do appear, which does contribute of Peridot coming back to Homeworld as so of what she thought. But considering that the Rubies aren't meant to be taken seriously aside from when they fuse together to become a giant Ruby towards the end, this episode honestly feels like a Ruby and Sapphire episode when it comes to them flirting with each other, which for me personally really makes this episode odd when it's a baseball episode, but it really feels like that they need to have conflict involving the conflict of protecting Peridot from coming back to Homeworld. Even though I'm not a fan of baseball in general, the only thing I can get when it comes to baseball in this is the fact that the Crystal Gems are doing something that they haven't done before, but at the same time, it's not really difficult to remember the rules of baseball, because knowing full well that this is mainly a way for the Rubies to get away and they mostly get into this whole baseball game thing without having any questions whatsoever. This episode didn't feel rushed, but at the same time the focus wasn't really on the Crystal Gems. It's mainly the Rubies and the flirting between Ruby and Sapphire. To tell you the truth, the flirting in this episode really indicates that when they unfused from Keystone Motel, it's always the differences. And since that they don't have any differences in this episode, it's really impossible for them to be unfused in situations that are really important when it comes to Steven protecting Peridot. At the same time though, this isn't really a problem knowing how that this bond between Ruby and Sapphire is this huge that it's really the main factor of making these episodes when it comes to the creator and the storyboard writers themselves. Even though that I'm disappointed that this show didn't have any writers whatsoever, I have to admit that they at least tried to make this whole thing work out, and considering of how that the whole wedding thing ended up crashing things down when it comes to this show, it's gonna be a really difficult ride to discuss on how I feel about the wedding and how rushed it is. But when it comes to this episode itself, I still enjoy it for what it is. Even if I'm not a fan of baseball, this episode's way of doing baseball got me entertained. And to tell you the truth, even though that it didn't top the last episodes that I discussed, it doesn't have to be that serious after the episodes that we've talked about before, because as far as I'm concerned, aside from Log 715-2, literally the majority of episodes that I've talked about were really important. This marathon of episodes have a lot of important episodes when it comes to the main arc of the show, but then again, if I did this as a month rather than a marathon, then I would probably only tackle 20 episodes, and for me personally, Me picking the marathon has more of a purpose, considering that I will be able to talk about more about this show rather than saving the majority of it for a later time, because I know full well it's not going to happen if I did a Steven Universe month. I'm giving this episode a 7 out of 10.